Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Today, I welcome on the show one of my heroes. This gentleman came into my life alongside of a personal mentor for me who was Jim Rohn. This gentleman has, in fact, led the way in the success field. He's a motivational speaker. In fact, he is in the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. He is an international bestseller with over 20 books that have been published, New York Times bestselling author as well. He's made a run in the Republican race. He is now running not-for-profit organizations. He is a world leader. He is a success coach. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome to the show Mr. Chris Widener. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate this. This is great.
Man, it is so cool to have you on the show. I mentioned in that little intro, you're a hero of mine. I came across your work with Jim, of course, in 12 Pillars. How did that kind of collaboration come into play? Like, that seems like an incredible place to start this conversation about success and about business and about life in front of us. How did that collab come with 12 Pillars?
Yeah, so here's what happened. I was a pastor of a church from 1988 till 2002, but I was what they call a church planter. And that's just fancy words for go start a church. And so I ended up in this town where there wasn't one of our churches and they didn't have any money to give me. They just wanted me to go start a church. So over the course of 11 years, I started 3 churches in the surrounding towns and such, but I had to make some money. So I had a really crazy upbringing. So I decided to go and start speaking more. And then eventually I was kind of doing youth speaking in college and, junior high and high school and that kind of stuff. Eventually I ended up starting doing some more for like time management leadership. And then I decided to go and write and speak full time in 2002. And over the course of the next 7 years, I ended up working with a guy named John Maxwell, who most people will probably be familiar with. I ghost wrote for John. And then when I was writing for John, word kind of got out that I was writing for John. And so they called me and he asked me if I would write with Jim Rohn. And so I said, I will, as long as my name gets to go on it, because my name didn't get to go on the stuff with John. So I said, I will do it, but I want my name to go on it. So I started working with him. We wrote we did a thing together called the Jim Rohn 1-Year Success Plan, which was 52 weeks, weekly emails. We interviewed, lots of great people. Jim wrote some stuff. I wrote some stuff, that kind of thing. And then, so at the same time as that, I had just written a book called The Angel Inside. I fired all my ghostwriting people because I felt like I was giving my best ideas away. Literally, the very first thing I wrote after I stopped ghostwriting for John, I wrote a book called The Angel Inside. And it ended up, we sold 120,000 copies of self-published, and then Random House bought it for their currency in print. It became #2 on the Wall Street Journal, #7 on the New York Times. And it was a fictional little story about 20,000 words about a young man who's on vacation. It's the last afternoon of his trip to Europe, and he's in Florence, Italy, and he meets a little old man who takes him on a tour of Florence, and he teaches him life lessons from the life of Michelangelo. That book was so successful, I said to Kyle Wilson, who was the president of Jim Rohn International, I said, we just did this 12-month Jim Rohn 1-year program. Why don't we take the principles from each month, because they were 12 pillars. So every month we did a different pillar. I said, why don't I write a story about the 12 pillars, but we'll put it into story form. And so I created a story wherein we could insert those kinds of things. And then just to sort of bring full circle, shortly after that, I got a phone call from Zig Ziglar, and they asked me to co-host his television show. So when people say, how did you become such a big, famous, internationally known speaker? I said, it's really simple. It's just a 3-step process. All you have to do is have John Maxwell call you, and then you have Jim Rohn call you, and then you have Zig Ziglar call you. And that's it's simple.
It's so easy from there.
No, I mean, really, I really believe God just opened some amazing doors, and I was very, very fortunate to work with them. 12 Pillars is my best-selling book, even though we didn't hit best-selling status because we self-published.
Right.
But Jim was big in the network marketing world. I mean, we'd have network marketing companies call and buy 10,000 copies at a time.
Not a bad way to get the orders.
Not a bad, but then the interesting thing is at the end of the book, we sold them then into the Jim Rohn 1-year program.
Perfect.
So they were actually paying for a 20,000 word advertisement for the Jim Rohn 1-year program.
No, it's best lead magnet
business
ever.
Model behind that.
So good.
And I'll tell you what, I wrote that from October 2002 until September 2003. So 21 years ago,
Wow.
I still get royalties on the Jim Rohn 1-year program 21 years after hitting the last keystroke.
Amazing. So such a good business model, that the publishing
Yeah.
space. And of course, like, you know, finding the angel inside, finding the magic inside, everybody's got that opportunity to create something incredible. And amazing that you had that opportunity to ghostwrite for, you know, some of the big names in the space. Chris, I did an interview with a guy named John Spence, who was a Fortune 500 CEO, and he credits a lot of his success to personal development material. He was a college dropout, you know, sleeping on his friend's couch, and his friend gave him a book and said, read this. And he never looked back. And he had a phrase there, which was, I said to him, how much of a difference did it make? And he said, you know, I was just too naive to think that there was any other way. And I love that. It's like too naive to fail, right? And I'm thinking the material that is in the personal development space, and of course, you know, being for yourself with Success Magazine, you are literally listed as one of the top 10 Success Magazine speakers in the world, which is an incredible endorsement. How much do you feel that people can pivot their life, can change their trajectory based on the material that's accessible to them? You know, ChrisWidener.com, through the Success Magazine, through Entrepreneur.com, like all of these amazing places. How much do you think people can change their lives really with this material?
I think anybody can change their life. In fact, I like to joke that you could go into the self-help section at you know, your local bookstore, and I actually took a guy we were at the bookstore one time, and we were in the self-help, and this is where it sort of initiated. I said, how many different titles can you have for a book that basically says, get off your ass and do something? Because honestly, success is simple. It's hard, but it's simple. And, you know, G.K. Chesterton was a Catholic theologian, and he has a quote about Christianity that I sort of changed to just be about life. G.K. Chesterton said, it's not that Christianity has been tried and found wanting. It's that it's been found difficult and left untried. And I would say the same thing about just success. It's not that success has been tried and found wanting. It's that success has been found difficult and left untried. And so I really do believe that that anybody can do it. I really believe anybody can do what they want to do. I don't believe in the superhuman. I mean, obviously, you know, there are people who are great physical specimens. You know, Shaquille O'Neal. You know, I'm never going to dunk on Shaquille O'Neal, right? Because there's some physical limitations and things like that. But generally speaking, anybody can do whatever it is that they want. Most people just won't learn what they need to learn and then apply what they learned.
Right.
But, you know, sometimes people say, how did you write 24 books? You know what my answer is? If somebody says, how did you write 24 books? It's always the same answer, one word at a time.
You got it. No other way forward. I think, like, not only have you been an incredible success in the as an author, you know, as a speaker, but you've launched multiple companies as well. Just before we hit record, you were saying to me that you've just created a not-for-profit organization called shareright.org. So your experience in the personal development space has then kind of, I guess, accelerated your business acumen as well, right?
Yeah, and I actually do less now in the personal development world than I ever have over the last 30 years. I you know, I kind of hit the pinnacle of it, and it's like it sort of lost its luster. And then there's a lot of people out there, and I won't name names, but I always said if I wrote a tell-all about the self-help world, a lot of kingdoms would fall, because I mean, there are people who have built their entire, I mean, some of the most famous guys in our industry. And I always want to say this, I'm not talking about Tony Robbins. So don't go, oh, is he telling us about Tony? No, I'm talking about other people, but famous people whose entire resume is built on a lie, whose entire business is built on a lie, that if anybody ever found out, they would disappear from the world, you know, the success world, because people go, oh, this is totally phony. But, you know, I got to the point where I was standing on stages with 25,000 people, traveling all over the world: Russia, Singapore, China, Egypt, Spain, Italy, Australia. I was telling you, I did one tour through Brisbane and Sydney and another through Melbourne. Stages as big as 25,000 people, and selling, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of audio programs and all that kind of stuff. And after a while, I don't know that I would say I got bored with it, but I just thought, I want to challenge myself. So maybe my transition out of doing speeches, I still do speeches, pretty regularly, but it's not my focus. I'm not promoting myself. I'm not marketing myself, if the phone rings, but I have a lot of fun. I like to try new things, and I like to conquer things, and I like to prove to myself that I can do things. And so in a way it was kind of like, well, I did that. I got the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. I got a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling book. I spoke on a stage of 25,000 people. I've shared the stage with some of the most incredible people. I had a television show, not only the one that I co-hosted with Zig, but the one that I did on my own. And it was kind of like, what's next? Like, it's kind of like when somebody wants to climb the biggest mountains, they don't start with Mount Everest. They start with, some smaller mountain, they climb it. You go, okay, I got to the top. What's the next one? Well, they want to go to something higher. So that's kind of and I'm getting older. I'm 58, and, I probably got another good 20 years in me, but you want to build something significant. It takes some time to build it.
So ticking those things off, like, okay, I've spoken on a stage of 25,000, New York Times best-selling author. Yeah, bang, 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 bang. What in your life, what have you found difficult?
People.
Oh, tell me about that. Why? Tell me about that.
I always say the best part about life is people.
Mm.
And the worst part about life is people. I mean, if you think about it, the most beautiful relationships you have, we're men, right? So having a wife who you're friends with, and you make love to, and you share dinners with, and you travel with, the epitome of the human experience, right? Of human connection is your spouse, and that beauty that comes from a good relationship, or a good friend. I've got 2 or 3 friends. We've been friends for 20 years, and you get on the phone with them, or you go to lunch with them, and it's just amazing. I've had a friend for a long time. We don't live in the same city anymore, but he was the president of a Major League Baseball team, and a very good, dear friend of mine. I was on the phone with him a couple of days ago, but every Christmas we gave each other a book for Christmas. We had a Christmas lunch every Christmas. I mean, we met more than that. We golfed and all that, but sometimes you golf and you have fun. But what we also did to provide meaning and that kind of stuff, every Christmas we did a fancy lunch. He was always in a suit and tie because he was the president of a Major League Baseball team. I would actually dress up for the lunch, and I would bring him a wrapped book, and he would bring me a wrapped book. And I always bought him like a historical biography or something, because he loves that kind of stuff, or stuff on the Civil War and, things like that. And he would always probably give me a political book or a spiritual book or something like that. And the richness of those kinds of friendships are amazing. But then you have bad business partners, and you have the neighbor next door that won't clean his front yard, and you got this, that, and people who are complaining about things, and all this kind of stuff. It got to a point where I had gotten into some business deals with people, and I'm probably a little too naive. I do business with people because I expect that they'll be like me, which is honest and decent. About 2 years ago, my son, who turned 34 today, we're recording today, it's actually his 34th birthday. About 2 years ago, my son says to me, "Dad," I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I think your partner picker's off."
All right.
And I said, "Yeah, I think my partner picker might be off, actually." So now I lean on my wife a lot more, because I think women have a lot of intuition about people. And sometimes my wife will say, "Nah, bad guy. Stay away from that guy. Bad guy." And I'm like, "He's really good." "No, honey, really." And she's like, "Bad guy." Well, after a while,
they've got some sort of radar, isn't it? My wife's the same. She's like,
it is.
It's
Well, they call it women's intuition, and
right.
I think it is. Plus, our wives are protective of us,
Truth.
so they're kind of even looking for that, because not only because they love us, but because they know that if we hurt, we bring it home, and now they got to put up with all the crap. So,
Truth. Absolutely.
So some of it is just self-preservation for our wives.
Yeah, no. So most amazing part of life is people. Most difficult part of life is people. If you've learned, so as you've gone into this business space and looking at those challenges and built incredible companies along the way, could you distill the lessons that you've had to learn in that transition again into pillars? Like, are there a few things that you say, listen, you need to succeed in business, there's some things you got to tick off? Like, what would those things be for you?
In regard to people?
In regard to business, in regards to creating something amazing as a legacy, as a company, as in regards to being an entrepreneur and making something happen for yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I'll
what
tell you what,
are the principles for you?
I'll start with one as a segue.
Yeah.
People. So my wife is responsible for about $600 million a year in sales for one of the largest companies in America. Well, actually,
Amazing.
one of the largest companies in the world. She has a big job and runs a very sizable business for a multi tens of billions of dollars a year.
Wow.
And one of the first things she taught me was get a contract. I have done maybe 100 handshake deals.
Oof.
And that has always been me. And I kind of prided myself in it, but I got screwed a lot. I mean, I've had people literally, we do a handshake deal, we do the event, and there's all this money, and they literally just disappear. I mean, really, truly. And so
number one, get it in writing.
Number one, get it in writing.
Right.
But if I were to go back, I would say, first of all, realize that life is short.
Okay.
My dad was the CFO of what is now one of the largest architecture firms in the world. They're probably top 15 architecture firms in the world. He died in 1970. In 1969, his last full year of earning, he made $90,000.
Wow.
And we lived in a house that, which would be about $1 million a year now. And we lived in a house that most recently sold for $3.8 million. My mom had to sell the house when he died at the age of 41. Because he did not have life insurance. He had like $30,000 worth of life insurance. So we moved out of this house because she couldn't afford $400 a month in the mortgage. So I think the first thing is understand that life is short, because I always say that life is precious because it ends, and life is an adventure because you never know when. And so, I think it's important to understand you're going to die. And death is a great motivator, because if we were going to live forever, we could procrastinate. I'll get to it in a couple hundred years. I'm going to spend the next 100 years doing this, and then I'll get to it a couple hundred years from now. But you don't get that much time. And the problem is you don't know how much time you get. Most of us maybe get 75 on average, 75 years average lifespan of a man in the United States. And so understanding that life is short. Number two, let your dreams and your ambition out. Let it out. Go do it. Try it. My favorite book, in fact, you mentioned 12 Pillars. If you remember in one chapter in 12 Pillars, it was about being a lifelong learner. And one of the characters gives the other character a book list. But he says, I'm going to give you the first book. And the first book he gives him, do you remember what the book was that he gives the younger guy?
I don't know.
It was The Magic of Thinking Big,
David Schwartz.
The Magic of Thinking Big. And I very purposely chose that book to be the one that he gave the young guy, was The Magic of Thinking Big, because I really believe that it's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. That's probably a quote that I'm most well known for. It's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. And I'll tell you one story I learned. I was 14 years old. This is probably how I ended up becoming one of the top 10 sales speakers in the world. I was 14 years old, and my mom was working at a hospital in Seattle. And I used to go there after school and wait, and we'd drive home together. And I got to know this guy. He seemed really old to me at the time. He was probably 40 or 45. And he was a records filer. That's all this guy did, 8 hours a day, filed medical records. Parentheses, shoot me now.
Right.
I do not want, I mean, come on. Well,
it's the reason AI was invented. Yeah.
He wanted more for his life. So he borrowed $7,000. When I was 14, that would have been 1980. He borrowed $7,000 from a rich uncle, and he bought the rights to a self-watering flower pot. Now, this flower pot was 2 plastic bowls. The bottom bowl held the water. The top bowl, you sat down into the other one, held the plant. And then there was a lever on the side from left to right. One gave it a lot more water, pulled a lot more water out. And on the far right, it pulled less water out. So on the left, you'd have an African violet. On the right, you'd have a cactus, right? So he says to me, hey, I just got the rights to this thing. How would you like to make some money? I said, I'd love to make some money. And he says, well, I'll tell you what. If you'll sell them, I'll pay you to sell them. And I said, okay, what do I get? And he said, I'll give you $1 a pot. I said, done. Now, he thought I was going to go door to door and sell them to old ladies. So what I did was I called, now this was before the big box stores like Home Depot and Lowe's and all those things. This was back when there were, smaller regional things. And I can't remember, I think it was Pay and Pack, if I remember right. It doesn't even exist anymore. It might've been Pay and Pack, might've been Pay and Save, might've been Ernst Home Centers. I don't remember which one it was. But I do remember that they were the biggest chain in the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, that kind of thing. And so I called them up. I said, I got a self-watering flower pot I want to sell you. Can I come in and show your buyer? They said, sure. So I told my mom, I got an appointment to go sell these flower pots. She goes, what? So she drags me down to some store and she buys me khaki pants and a blue blazer. Now, picture a 14-year-old in khaki pants and a blue blazer. None of them fit. You see a kid nowadays, he's 14 wearing a blazer, never fits. So she drops me off on a street corner in downtown Seattle. I walk in, I said, I have an appointment with so-and-so. And they looked at me and I'm holding a flower pot. They look at me, they look at it. Okay. I go up, the elevator doors open and there's this man standing there and the look on his face, I could still see it, was priceless. He's like, huh? I walk him in, I go, I got a self-watering flower pot. And he goes, okay. And there was no dirt or plant in the top one. So I put water in the bottom. I put the other one in. And so you could see there was no water in the top one. I moved the lever and water appeared. He goes, I'm a buyer. And I said, okay, what does that mean? He goes, well, I'll tell you what, I want to do a 1-year test on this. So he said, I'll tell you what, I'll take 4 boxes. How many in a box? I said, 24. He said, I'll take 4 boxes for each of 20 stores for a year. So let's call it 25 to a box because it'll make the math a little bit easier. He bought 100 pots times 20 stores. He placed an order for 2,000 pots every month for a year. He bought 24,000 pots after a 4-minute demonstration. Now, that's a great lesson, right? It's just as easy to think big. It was just as easy. In fact, it was easier for me to call that guy and say, can I come show you this pot? Than it would have been for me to go walk down a street for 3 hours, knocking on doors, trying to get somebody to buy one. And so, but here's another great lesson. I took that order back to that guy and I said, I sold some pots. And he goes, yeah, how many pots did you sell? And I said, whatever the math was, 23,872. And he literally, his jaw dropped and I held the purchase order up to him. And I kid you not, he quit. He called the company up. He said, I want my $7,000 back. And he sold it back. He sold the rights back. He was terrified of success.
Oh my
God. But the irony of it was,
wow.
It was a drop ship deal. It wasn't like he had to store 24,000 pots in his apartment. He just had to have them drop shipped to their distribution center.
Wow.
But all of a sudden, because if I was making $1 a pot, how much was he making every pot? So anyway, that's a great lesson. There are some people who are terrified of success, but the real lesson there is let your ambition, dream big, think big. Jim Rohn always used to say, let other people do that, but not you. Let other people do that. Well, let other people think small, but not you. We have enough small thinkers in the world. We need people who will think big. So, whatever you're thinking about doing, think bigger. Think bigger. I think that's a great lesson.
I think it's an amazing lesson because the time's going to pass anyway, right? Like you said, if you're going to knock doors and sell 3 pots in an afternoon, right? Which, would be a good afternoon if you're knocking doors, right?
For a 14-year-old kid.
Or you make 1 call and sell 25,000. Like the time's going to pass the same. So you may as well be big in that time. You may as well have that incredible thing. So first of all,
I did another deal in the early 2000s where a friend of mine said, hey, what would you think about putting together boxes of audio programs from professional speakers? And I said, okay, sure. That's a great idea. I know them all. And so we spent one summer, me and him, smoking cigars and drinking whiskey on his front porch and calling professional speakers and securing the rights to their audio programs. We put them into a box around themes. So our 3 biggest SKUs were leadership, was one, sales success was another, and the other one was called Verbal Power. It was communication box, 14 CDs, 1 DVD. Now, I could have gone to Joe's local bookstore and said, hey, I'd like to consign these with you. Here's 10 of them. I'll come back in a month and find out. We made one phone call. The very first phone call we called was Costco. And within 3 or 4 months, we were selling 50 to 75,000 boxes a month through Costco and Sam's Club.
Wow.
Because I thought it's just as easy to think big as it is to think small.
Wow. Incredible.
We were selling, those 50,000, I think MSRP was, it was just under $30. So called $1.5 million a month in audio programs through Costco. And then of course, Sam's Club wanted in on the deal. And then we created a smaller version for Borders and Barnes and Noble and, all the regular big bookstores, Books A Million and those kinds of things. But it really comes down to, it's just as easy to think big as it is to think small.
I think it's probably one of the most powerful lessons that you could ever deliver. Thank you. I appreciate it. And in terms of your business growth, that obviously has fueled you. You've been able to create big opportunities because you've seen that I can, and therefore I do. I can, and therefore I do. And look at the incredible results. What are the things, like if you got a chance to wind back the last 30 years, now that you've been kind of Chris the businessman for the last 30 years, what would you do differently? Like, what lessons have you learned that have said, whoa, hang on.
Number one, get a contract.
Right. So get it in writing, think bigger, right? Like that's been the driving thing. But has there been things that you've, like, let me ask it a different way. What's the biggest mistake you've made, and what would you do differently to as a result of that lesson?
Well, I hate to keep beating the drum, but
get a contract.
Get a contract,
right.
Trusting people. No, it's interesting. My dad died when I was 4, and my mom sold real estate, and she was flipping houses before they were doing it on television. So I lived in 28 homes, and I went to 11 different schools. And because my mother was crazy and I was not a really good kid, she ended up shipping me off to live with relatives twice. And one of the best things that came out of that was I am really good at making quick relationships,
right,
and building rapport very quickly, because every year just about I was moving to a different school. And so, I suppose some kids walk into a new school every year and they sit by they sit in the corner and they, whatever. I walked in and I was like, I got to make friends. I still have friends literally from the 3rd grade. I think that's the oldest friend I have. I have 2 guys that I'm still friends with that we were best friends in the 3rd grade.
Wow.
And I mean, people all throughout my life, moving around and meeting people, building relationships. So I think the ability to build relationships is probably one of the keys to success as well. Because you really don't do business with a business. You do business with the person who's representing the business, whether it's the owner or the salesperson or whatever. So this ability to be able to build quick rapport, I have all these books that I've written. I have 3 or 4 different publishers with all my SKUs across them. Well, one of my publishers probably has 10 of my books and 20 of my audio programs or something like that. But the number one book and audio, it's a book and an audio that I have with him, with all these SKUs, when I get my royalties once a quarter, one product is half of my royalties with this publisher. And the title of it is How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere. And it's a 3-step process to be able to get over the fear when you sit down at that wedding reception and you're parked at a table and you don't know anybody, or you sit down in your airplane seat for a 6-hour flight, or you are somewhere where you now have to talk to people. Most people don't know how to create that instant rapport. And I teach people how to create almost instant rapport, because ultimately you're selling to a person. You're not selling to a company, you're selling to a person. So the ability to build and maintain relationships, I think, is really important.
Amazing.
And getting along with people, understanding how they work, understanding what their triggers are. And I mean triggers probably in a positive way. Triggered is a negative term now, but the things that will trigger them to respond and to come closer, both literally and figuratively, those kinds of things. So mistakes that I've made. I'm a little ADD and a little ADHD, but as I learned when I was studying for my book on Michelangelo, The Angel Inside, He was too. In fact, Michelangelo left over 200 unfinished projects when he died. There were over 200 projects that he started and didn't finish. He started them, got bored, started them, moved on to somebody else, something else. So I think probably to my detriment is probably my lack of focus.
I think that's part of the territory of being an entrepreneur.
yeah, it really is. In fact, I have a friend of mine. For those of you who have ADHD, you should get this book. My friend doesn't even know I'm pitching his book now. But my friend's name is Brad Worthley. And Brad wrote a book called The Gift of ADHD. And the subtitle is, If You Don't Have It, You Should Get It. And the whole book is about these wildly successful entrepreneurs who had ADHD.
Yeah.
Because ADHD or ADD, and I've never been diagnosed, and I don't need to go get diagnosed, but while you sort of are scatterbrained with a lot of things, when you finally lock in, you lock in, and you are relentless about getting it. So I think understanding yourself is probably another real key, is understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. I am very aware of my strengths and I use them, and I'm very aware of my weaknesses and I hire to cover my weaknesses.
Fantastic.
So I have a gal that works with me, and I call her my right-hand gal, and she used to work for a friend of mine. And I said, I called him up and I said, hey, I was thinking about hiring her. And I said, what's her greatest strength? And he said, getting shit done. That's her greatest strength. And I said, she's hired.
Right.
Because
when did she start?
That's really what I need. I'm a great visionary, but I will miss a lot of things if I'm in charge of those things. Mm-hmm. So having somebody, but there are other people who are really good at that, right, but they need sort of a visionary partner. So understanding yourself, I think, is another really key thing, knowing what you're good at and hiring to those things that you aren't.
Amazing. And again, same lessons everywhere, right? It's like everybody's, there's got to be a reason why the successful people are saying the same things. You got to hire for your weaknesses. You got to it's all amazing stuff. So Chris, you were a church seed. I think you called it before,
they call them church planter. Yeah.
Church planters, right? You're self-watering pot, and now you're church planter. Like, I can see the theme here. I get it going on. But if I took you right now and I dropped you into a city, let's say it's in the US, where you didn't have your business with you, you didn't have your Rolodex of contacts and networks, what would you do to start something and create something in that space?
You mean start a business in that town?
Yeah, absolutely. Like zero Rolodex. Like we were talking just before we jumped on about Mark Cuban, and I know that somebody else in the space, Grant Cardone, does this big thing about he got dropped in a city and whatever. He's got his whole campaign about that. But I'm thinking more about you because of the way you think, in terms of think bigger, do stuff with more. You've started things from scratch from many times before. You understand how people think with the political side of things. Like, you've got some skills there that I'd be curious to know. Just literally dropped into a city and you've got,
well, the hardest part about the scenario you gave me was I don't have my network.
Right.
Because, it's almost pithy at this point to hear somebody say your net worth is based on your network. And it's really true.
I asked you that for a very specific reason, because you've got that fast connection skill set. Like, I'm really curious now how that would impact you in that barren wasteland of, geez, got to start everything again. Like,
I would probably try to find some business that I'm interested in, that's already established. And I would probably try to find a way to serve the owner of that business. I would say, what's your biggest problem and how much would you pay for me to solve it? That's probably what I would do. I would say, what's your biggest problem and how can I solve it? I mentioned Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and John Maxwell. And I think there's a lesson there. Like, people are like, how did you get that? And I'll tell you, it was very specific. I really believe this. When somebody meets somebody else that is famous or has achieved something that they want to achieve, most people ask the same question. They say, I want to be just like you. Will you help me? Wrong question. I said, I want to be just like you. How can I help you? Well, I'm a good writer. And so that's what John Maxwell and Jim Rohn hired me for, was the writing. But I always say, everybody wants to be first fiddle in the orchestra, but if you're second fiddle and first fiddle is a world-renowned violinist, you're in business. And so I ended up pairing myself with two of the greatest legends in John Maxwell and Jim Rohn, by being able to say, how can I help you? Well, the way you can help, because those guys didn't have time to go help somebody else. They needed help.
Right.
So I helped them. That was the way I flipped it. How can I help you?
Mm.
And then with Zig Ziglar, unfortunately, at the end of Zig's life, he got pretty bad dementia. And I realized after the fact that one of the reasons they asked me to co-host the show was because they needed me to move it through. Because by the end of his life, Zig had amazing long-term, he could tell you a story from 60 years ago down to the perfect detail. The problem is that he had no short-term memory. And as soon as he was done, he'd tell you the story again.
Right.
So so I realized while I helped John and Jim in the writing department, the way I was brought in was to serve Zig, was to be that guy that moved it forward to him. So Zig Ziglar was not asking me to come in, for my grand ideas. Although I will tell you this, after about the second or third episode, Tom, his son, who was president of Ziglar Corporation, Tom came to me, and it was funny. Tom always calls his dad Zig. He doesn't call him, well, he calls him dad when he's just out and about, but when they were in a room together, he would say Zig. And he said to me, he said, Chris, he said, Zig asked me if I could get you to talk more and to, not just be the question asker, but I was asked, I was invited to do that.
Wow.
I didn't come in thinking that that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
In fact, when I tell people what my job was, you ever been to like a batting practice for a baseball game, right? Or the home run derby? Every year they do the all-star game and they have a home run derby. And every single one of these big famous, home run kings, they all show up, but there's some dude out on the mound. Nobody knows who that guy is. Nobody cares who the guy is. Nobody wants to know who the guy is. But his job, throw that ball right across the plate so the famous guy can swat it out of the park. That's truly how I went into being Zig Ziglar's co-host. I thought my job is to throw batting practice for Zig Ziglar. So, it kind of reminds me of the old biblical thing where Jesus said, when you're invited to a banquet, don't go sit at the head of the table, because somebody more important than you might come in and they're going to ask you to move down and you're going to be embarrassed by it. Instead, sit at the other end of the table, because no matter how many empty seats there are, they're always going to ask you to move up the table. So I think that idea of humility is also something that played into it, but it was about serving other people. So back to your original question, I would find a business that I like, that I'm passionate about, and I would say, how can I help you? What can I do?
It's so cool, man. I think the opportunity of that question, how can I best serve, is, for a start, you're never going to be short of opportunity, right? You're literally never going to be short of an opportunity. If you can be of service, then you're always going to have an opportunity to shine and to be second fiddle, to be the pitcher, to be the guy. Like, you will always be valuable if you have that how can I be of service mentality, which actually brings me to your current project, which is your shareright.org. You've told the story, and I think knowing a little bit from your public history about your dad and about your mom, and the fact that he was the family was underinsured, and that completely changed your life. I remember hearing, in one of the Success Magazine tape sets that I had, you told that story specifically because it created that movement in your life. And now, you've got shareright.org, which you've created as being part of, as a way of helping and serving other people in that space. You want to tell me a little bit more about that? Because I'm really fascinated as the journey that you've gone through with the entire personal success mantra, with the business success, with being the top of the game, and the impact of your dad at 4 years old passing away, your mom being underinsured, and the journey that led you on has now put you in this position where being of service in that space has created something.
Yeah. The number one thing that families spend money on is their mortgage. The second biggest amount of money that they spend every month is health insurance. And the top 5 health insurance companies in America, I went and looked at how much their CEOs make. The least that the big 5 make, CEO, is $18.5 million a year. The most was $25.3 million a year, something like that. So the top 5 insurance companies every year, the first $100 million that they bring in goes to 5 people. And then you got thousands of vice presidents that are making $1 million. And then you got, your senior vice presidents that are, or executive vice presidents that are making 500,000. And because most of them are for-profit organizations. So in the Affordable Care Act, of what is more known as Obamacare, there's a carve out for something called health sharing organizations. And they are always housed in a nonprofit 501c3. So in America, in the US, you're not allowed to pay people outrageous salaries. That's part of the deal. We'll give you tax-free as long as, it's not a for-profit. There's not somebody pulling $1 million out every year or whatever. So it's very, very inexpensive. It also has a lot of freedom to it. And it also allows you, most health insurance, you're required to cover everything. And the Affordable Care Act said you have to cover pre-existing conditions. Health sharing, you're not required to do that. So the fact that it's wrapped up in a 501c3 and the fact that you don't have to pay for pre-existing conditions and things like that, it can take families that are relatively healthy and it can give them that coverage that they need to be able to have affordable health care. And they call it health sharing. Functionally, it really works just like health insurance. You go in, you have your procedure, you get your bill, you swipe your card, it goes to ShareRight, they negotiate the fees down, they make payment if a payment is due to the medical provider, or they tell you, you still haven't hit your amount that you have to pay first. But the very first person that I showed this to, he was 40 years old, married, with 4 kids under the age of 18. And I asked him, I said, how much do you pay for health insurance? He said, I pay $2,800 a month. Within 30 seconds, I pulled up, and I'll give you the web address, shareright.org/pricing. In less than 30 seconds, you will be able to find out exactly how much you would pay.
I love it.
So we put in his birthday. He was born in 1984. And we put in how many people in his family. And we only have 1, 2, or 3 plus. So if you have 3 people, a couple with a kid, or you have a couple with 5 kids, same price. So we typed it in, birthday, 3 plus, click. He went from $2,800 a month to $805 a month. He went from a $16,000 deductible to a $2,500 primary contribution, which we don't use insurance language. It's part of the deal is the Affordable Care Act. You can't use the language. So we don't use deductible. It's called a primary contribution amount, a PCA, I think is what they call it. So anyway, if this guy were to have some health problems in his family and they hit that deductible, he would literally save $37,000 a year just getting away from his $2,800 a month to an $805 a month. It's just shy of $24,000 a year straight into his pocket. So what I realized was we can take that giant payment that most people pay and make it into a fraction. And particularly with the economy the way that it is, with inflation and gas is up and groceries are up and, everything is up, it's going to give people that kind of freedom. So
that's amazing.
It really is great. And functionally, it operates the same way and better coverage. We pay our bills within, I think our average is 13 days. It takes us 13 days from the moment we get it to the moment the decision is being made and either payment has been made or notification has been made that you still need to make your payment to meet your primary contribution. 13 days. Amazing. So I'm really excited about it because this is the kind of thing that's going to make a difference, not only for people who really, really need it, but it also makes a difference for people who don't need the money. One of the first guys I talked to about it, we pitched it to him. He sold his company for like $500 million. And I was talking to him on the phone and I was telling him about it. And he goes, I only got a little bit of time to talk. He said, I'm getting in my jet and I'm flying to San Francisco. I'm going to watch the Warriors play tonight. So we did this thing. And I said, you're going to save $15,000 a year. I said, that's like a tank of gas for your jet. He goes, dude, it's not even a half a tank of gas for my jet. But he said this, but it's still $15,000 a year.
Right,
I don't have.
There it is. There it is.
So even the
Absolutely.
rich guys are like, I can save 15 grand just by doing the exact same thing, but paying it to this guy instead of this guy. I'm in.
I mean, I love it.
So anyway,
It's an
I'm
amazing.
excited about it because it's going to make a difference for people financially.
Yeah, and I think like I love the fact that that story about your beginning and foundation and the hardships that your mom went through and all of that kind of stuff has come full circle now into the opportunity there with
I had never put that
sure.
together. You put that together. I've never thought
You're
about
welcome,
that before.
man. You're welcome.
Thank you.
It's to me it made logical sense as soon as you told me what was going on. So guys, I think you know what, Chris, I said at the very beginning that it was an opportunity for me to jump on and spend some time with a hero of mine. And you know, you are the hero that you should meet. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that's happened in the world as a legacy that you've actually been a part of, to create change in so many entrepreneurs' lives, in so many people's lives who can link back to a pillar, or who can link back to a talk, or can relate something in their life story to a moment in time that involved you. So again, I want to share that appreciation with you. And I think we started to say, what are the lessons that you've learned getting into business? Obviously, being this kind of audience with our podcast, get a contract, be a fast friend, like learn how to be a fast friend, think bigger, and then wrapping that around your own experiences. Do what you're passionate about that can serve other people, and you'll never have to look for another opportunity in life. And like wrapping this episode with those kind of 4 core fundamentals, I think is spectacular. So ladies and gentlemen, Chris Widener, jump in, make sure that you're following this man on LinkedIn and on all of the socials that are out there as well. Dude, you continue to inspire, you continue to be a leader. I think that's in your nature, no matter what badge you're wearing. So I thank you and appreciate you for that. And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, just make sure you tap into what Chris is doing. And thank you, Chris. Appreciate your time, man.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn, probably the best place to connect with me. I would love to do that. And I'll leave you with one last bit of advice. It's the piece of advice that I was given when I was 22 years old. And I'll tell you the story. Can I take a minute and tell you the story?
Please do. Absolutely.
I was at a conference. It was one of the most eerie things that ever happened to me. Now you got to understand, I'm 58. I was 22 when this happened to me. 36 years I've carried this. I was at a conference. And it was during a break, and there's a couple hundred people milling around, and I was by myself at this conference. And so I turned around and I bumped into these 2 women. One was probably 55 and the other was probably 30. And I kind of bumped into her and said, "Oh, excuse me." And the older woman looked at me and said, "Oh, no problem." And I looked at the younger woman, and she was like this. And I don't know if this is a video or an audio version
It will be
doing here. She literally went like this. The younger woman, the 30-year-old one, like this. Her eyes got like saucers and her jaw dropped open.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, this is a little awkward. And her mother looked at her, and she looked at me. She looked at her daughter, and she said, "Is this him?" And I'm like, holy cow, am I about to get accused of something? And the girl still has not spoken a word. Her mouth's hanging open. Her eyes are saucers. And she goes like this.
She's nodding silently.
And I'm like, okay, this is just weird. So the mom says, "Listen, this is my daughter, and we're here at this conference. And in the middle of the night last night at 2 a.m, she sprung out of bed, completely wide awake, and woke me up." And I said, "Honey, what's wrong? What's going on?" And she said, "I just had a dream about somebody I'm supposed to give a message to." And so when she saw you and I saw the look on her face, my first thought was to this 2 a.m. thing that happened in the middle of the night. So she looks at her daughter and she says, "Well, tell him." And she said, "I'm supposed to tell you to be a voice, not an echo. I don't know who they are. I didn't get their number. I don't have their names. I never saw them again. But for 36 years, that has been the way I live my life. Be a voice, not an echo." And there's a lot of people that just regurgitate stuff. And I quote people, and I love to do that, but I always quote them. At least I give credit to them. I can't tell you how many people try to pass off Jim Rohn quotes as their own. In fact, it's kind of funny when somebody says, "Here's some advice. Work harder on yourself. You can do on your job." I always comment, "I love Jim Rohn quotes. Those are great." But so anyway, that's what I would tell people. And I'm a speaker, right? So that has like a literal thing for me. Be a voice, not an echo. But I would say, even if you're not a speaker, whatever you're doing in your life, be original. Be original. Don't be somebody else. The number one question typically that I get is, what was it like working with Jim Rohn, or what did you learn working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar? And I always say, be yourself, which is kind of a weird thing. Why would you learn that from working with Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn? I'll tell you why. Here are two guys that were at the pinnacle of that world that I wanted to be in. Superstars, impacted hundreds of millions of people, $100,000 a speech. Like, you could not pick two more different human beings than Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar pranced all over the stage. He would talk and pump his fist, and then he'd whisper, and then he'd kneel on the ground, and he's moving all over. And then I always say this about Jim. He stood behind a lectern, and you always know Jim's getting excited when he does this and takes his reading glasses off. Like, that's his power move. That's about all you're going to get from Jim Rohn. But what I realized was, they both were the superstars of that industry, completely different. I didn't need to be Zig Ziglar. I didn't need to be Jim Rohn. I didn't need to be Tony Robbins. Didn't need to be John Maxwell. Didn't need to be Dennis Waitley. Didn't need to be Brian Tracy. I needed to be Chris Widener. I needed to be a voice and not an echo. And I think that that's something that all business people should understand. Use it, put it whatever language you need into it, but be the original, not the fake or the phony or the knockoff.
I love it. I love it. And for those of you who are watching on our video version, you have magic in you. That's the sign that it's in the back of my video here, because that's so true. Each of you has something special that the world needs. And I love that message, man. I got goosebumps just as you were telling me that story. Guys, thank you so much. Again, Chris, I'm bowing to you. Amazing,
stop it.
Amazing to connect with you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
No, it's incredible, incredible. And do pop back in and let us know what's going on, and keep in touch. And again, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Widener. Chris, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.